like the challenge of scaling things up. And when I first started to work on agriculture, I was delighted to see how many good ideas on sustainability there were. But there wasn't so much scaling up. Turns out it's hard. I was also perplexed by a narrative I sometimes heard about farmers, particularly big farmers, that they were either indifferent to their impacts or manipulated by big business. Well, that just didn't really jive with what I knew about farmers. The farmers I talked to are passionate about sustainability and fiercely independent. Yes, there are problems with our farming system, and we have to do better. But farmers know this more than anyone else. Where I think we get tripped up is in the search for a sustainability silver bullet. Let's go small. GMOs are the answer. No GMOs. The problem is that silver bullets tarnish really easily. I bet y'all will be as surprised as I was to learn that it's small farms in Pennsylvania that are major contributors to polluted runoff in the Chesapeake. Conversely, I can show you industrial scale farmers who are doing things that are really amazing, really inspiring. In fact, I invite you back to this room tonight to see a screening of the documentary Rancher, Farmer, Fisherman. I think you'll be quite inspired. I'm inspired by what's possible when we resist the temptation to cast people as villains and instead really dig in and understand what are the economic and social forces that are affecting farming. And to help explain some of this, I thought you might like to hear a little bit about the work that we're doing at EDF on fertilizer. So how many people here have heard of fertilizer pollution? Well, we're a pretty educated group, but it's probably one of the problems that most people don't know that much about. Fertilizer is a plant food. It has helped increase yields, and that's really good because that means we're growing more food on the same amount of land. The problem is, for fertilizer that isn't taken up by the crops, it gets lost to the air in the form of a really powerful greenhouse gas called nitrous oxide, or it runs off where it creates contaminated water and dead zones. In 2014, fertilizer runoff into Lake Erie created a toxic bloom so big you could see it from space, and more importantly, it poisoned the water for 500,000 people. Environmental scientists and public health advocates have been worried about fertilizer pollution for 40 years. EPA calls it one of the most widespread, costly, and challenging environmental problems. And recently, the city of Des Moines went so far as to sue farmers. It wanted them to clean up their act or reimburse the city for water treatment costs. Talk about gnarly. We need fertilizer to grow our food, but fertilizer pollution hurts people and the planet. Well, we're suckers for gnarly at EDF, so, of course, we adopted the goal of ending fertilizer pollution. We began by going door to door, listening to farmers. We heard a number of really interesting things. First, good news. There are practices that are both cost-effective and can dramatically reduce the amount of fertilizer that we lose to our air and water. And the second was a bit of a riddle. We found out that farmers sometimes apply more fertilizer to their fields than the crops are going to use. Why would they do that? Well, imagine for a minute that if you had to pay for all of your family's expenses for a whole year up front, the start of the year, and you wouldn't get paid until the end of the year. I bet you'd really focus on reducing financial risk and doubling down on anything you could control. Well, that's kind of like what happens with farming. They have to pay for everything to grow our crops up front. They don't get paid until harvest time, and they're not even sure how much they're going to get paid. And there are huge variables that affect how much they're going to get paid that they have no control over. Things like the weather and global prices. But they do control fertilizer. I bet if any of us were in that situation, we wouldn't hesitate to double down on the fertilizer. So another thing we found is cultural norms get in the way. Practices like cover crops and no-till, you heard a little bit about them, they're very effective, but they take time to learn, and they can create messy-looking fields. One of the first stories I heard when I was starting this work was of a farmer who wanted to try no-till, and so he didn't plow part of his fields. Well, his neighbor came by wanted to know what hospital he was in. The cultural norm and bias for those nice, straight, well-plowed, clean fields is so strong, he couldn't imagine why his neighbor, a farmer in good standing, wouldn't be plowing all his fields. So these are some really big barriers to scaling up good ideas. To start chipping away at them, EDF assembled an informal network of commodity crop growers. Yes, those factory farming villains. We also brought in conservation groups, farming associations, the USDA, and we began to work with them to help document how to use these sustainable techniques to increase yields and keep fertilizer out of our air and water. It was painstaking work. One of my colleagues, Susie Friedman, spent so much time in Iowa, I would joke her that she could be running for president. But it took 10 years, but we did begin to change the economic perceptions and social acceptance of these practices, and we got 1 million acres into our network. That's not bad, until you realize that there are 90 million acres of corn alone, and corn is the most fertilizer-intensive crop, so we have to get corn. At our rate, it would have taken something like 900 years, and that just didn't fit my model of taking things to scale. So now I want to introduce another so-called bad guy. Walmart decided that it wanted to make a commitment to shrink its greenhouse gas footprint. You might think that it had big opportunities in things like transportation or the heating and cooling of its stores, but the real emissions were in its supply chain, like that nitrous oxide coming off the amber fields of grain. So, if you're interested in taking things to scale in agriculture, Walmart is really interesting because it's the largest grocery store in North America. The catch is, Walmart doesn't buy grain from farmers. It buys tortilla chips and soup and meat and corn syrup. Look at all the steps in between farmers and Walmart. Walmart didn't talk to farmers, didn't even know if farmers could reduce greenhouse gases. So we brought in some of the soy farmers, corn farmers, wheat farmers that we've been working with, and associations like the National Corn Growers. They talked to Walmart and told them what was possible. So Walmart then challenged its food companies to help them reach farmers. To date, 20 companies have stepped up. And these are household names: Kellogg's, General Mills, Campbell's, and the world's largest pork producer, Smithfield. Again, okay, not bad, not bad. But if we truly want to end fertilizer pollution, we've got to go beyond groceries. 50% of the corn doesn't even go into the food that we eat. It's exported and used to make ethanol for cars. So we've got to reach farmers no matter what their market is. So cue up more bad guys. This time, agribiz. No shortage of actors here. You know the names Monsanto, Cargill, Syngenta. But there's a category in this group called agricultural retailers. And what they do is they sell products like fertilizer and services like advice on how to do precision application of fertilizer to farmers. One of these companies, United Suppliers, saw a business opportunity in Walmart's initiative. We worked with them to develop a business model that could be better for the company by switching from maximizing fertilizer sales to providing sustainability services. In other words, aligning what they were selling with farmers' passion for yield and sustainability. So I told you I really like scaling things up. So let me show you what this looks like in numbers. On this side of the graph, you've got greenhouse gases. On that side, you've got total acres. And we start off with EDF's farmer network. There's your 1 million acres. We have the Walmart effect. Wow, we get a lot more. And then you add the retailers on top of that, and you really start to see momentum building. And by the way, that retailer I told you about, United Suppliers, they were just bought by Land O'Lakes. Now, I thought Land O'Lakes was a butter company, but it turns out they're an agribiz powerhouse. They offer advice to 50% of America's dairy and grain growers. So with this kind of momentum, we think we can hit a tipping point at which these sustainability practices will be business as usual, and we think we can do that in 8 years. That's 2 years quicker than it took us to get that first 1 million acres. So, what have I learned from our work on fertilizer? Well, first, sustainability in ag is going to be a lot of things. It's not one thing. Secondly, market forces are an incredibly powerful tool that can help us scale things up. 3, be tenacious. The networks and momentum that we're building right now are allowing us now to push the companies to make commitments on water just the way they have on greenhouse gases. That would have been unthinkable when we started this project. And finally, listen to farmers. In fact, listen to all the actors in the system. You just might find the guy you thought was a black hat really turns out to be a white hat. And that brings me back again to rancher, farmer, fisherman. The Discovery Channel has done a great job taking my colleague's book, Miriam Horn's book, and turning it into a really moving documentary. Its heroes hail from the red parts of our country, hardly the places that we usually think of as hotbeds of environmentalism. So while we might not have silver bullets, there are folks out there who are finding ways to nourish both people and the planet. Let's call it silver buckshot. Thank you.